Well, welcome to another episode of Eucatastrophe, and I'm glad that you're joining me. Today, I have what I is a fairly important topic, and I'm undecided at this point whether I'll do just one episode or break it up. Some of you may have already listened to this. I did upload it in a long form, about an hour and 20 minutes yesterday, and then upon when I went to test it or whatever, I realized that, and I should have done this before I uploaded it, but that my mic wasn't working and the audio was horrible, so I'm redoing it now, and I'm just considering whether I'll do two separate episodes, maybe a half hour each. You know what? I'm going to decide that on the fly. But today, what I want to talk about is Christian schools and the transgender accommodation. And I want to talk about this because it's something that the school that my daughter goes to is right now walking through this issue, and so there are some things that I want to say right at the beginning, just so you're aware that I'm going to talk about some of the legal opinion that's been given, but I want to make clear at the outset that I'm not a lawyer. I'm a pastor. Also, when I'm talking about Christian schools and their response, I'm assuming that the Christian school that I'm talking about here holds to a biblical sexual ethic, and that would mean such things as that of a gender binary man and woman, that marriage is reserved for a man, biological woman. That homosexuality is wrong or sinful. And so I'm assuming those things. And I'm going to be speaking most directly to the issue of transgender accommodation in this kind of podcast on the topic. So maybe I can give you just a little bit of background here. So we recently moved to a different city within British Columbia, and my daughter began at a new school, high school, the local Christian school. And shortly after the new year started, I was made aware that the school has been involved, like I assume many Christian schools have been involved in trying to prepare for, create policy on the treatment of sexual minorities, specifically the transgender issue and accommodation. And I think, needless to say, it's not been easygoing. There has been controversial first draft policy that was put out and then put on hold. There's been meetings of concerned parents. There's been meetings between board members and parents. There's been information evenings, constant board communication, updating the school society, what's going on. We've had presentations by lawyers and pastors panels, and so et cetera, et cetera. There's been a lot going on, and that's a very good thing, and I quite appreciate all of the communication and all of the meetings that have taken place, because I think we can all agree that it's a very complicated topic, and it certainly is new territory, and we need to be having rigorous debate over how we deal with this, and how we hammering out a Christian response to this stuff. And it's new territory, and not only for Christian schools, but for all facets of society, including the legal system, right? The application of the human rights code in these areas is uncharted. And so it's new for all facets of society. So maybe I'll break down for you as we begin here what I hope to achieve. And so the first thing I want to do is to give a summary of what I understand the legal opinion is toward Christian schools and making policy in terms of sexual minorities at the school. The second thing I want to do is I want to share with you 8 important points of confusion, I think, that require some careful thought when we consider the transgender challenge. I have noticed that in the conversations that take place, there are some things that either get confused or assumptions made that are not helpful to the conversation. So I want to outline 8 of those that I think, there's probably more, but these are the 8 that have stood out to me. And then third, I want to talk about, I guess third, there's a lot of subcategories in the third thing that I'll talk about, but just the approach of accommodation, and then what I feel is the wrong approach of accommodation, and then some thoughts on, moving forward. So I hope that's a rough outline of where I hope to go. And again, I want to state here right at the beginning that I'm not a lawyer. I am, as I give you the kind of the summary, the requirements of the law, I want to make that plain. This is coming from legal opinion that we've been given as a society at the school. So I'm going to share it here because I think it probably lays true for probably in broad strokes across Canada. This was given, of course, in the province of British Columbia, or coming from the province of British Columbia. So my daughters, and so let me share with you, or give you somewhat of a summary of the legal opinion. So my daughter's school has been receiving advice and working alongside the Society of Christian Schools of British Columbia, the SCSBC. It's my understanding that the SBSBC has been working closely with many independent schools, Christian schools, and also working with the government, the Ministry of Education, to understand really what the Ministry of Education is requiring in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity education and policy in these areas. So they've been very helpful, of course. I've enjoyed listening to them speak on the issue, although I disagree with some of the things that are said. I think that they've been very helpful for us as a society. The SCSBC and the school have also received, from my understanding, more than one legal opinion on what will be required of Christian schools when it comes to sexual minority students and the whole area of accommodation. So I've used the word accommodation already, and so that term accommodation is really crucial because it is really, I think, at the heart of the matter. And to sum up what one legal professional had said, that the question before Christian schools is not, in the eyes of the law, or the courts maybe, the question is not if the school will accommodate, but to what extent the school will accommodate the student, right? So if we have a student, let's say a female student who is self-genders as a male, identifies as a male, and comes and asks for accommodation in terms of pronoun use, she would like to use the pronouns he, him, like to use the male washroom and wear male clothing. What's the school's policy on the accommodation of that? So a few things that need to be considered and are good to know is, so Section 41 of the Human Rights Code allows religious organizations, such as Christian schools, to grant preference to members of that religion. And so this preference can be employed in the admissions process. A school can give kind of priority admissions to families that, are Christian, profess faith. Can sign a statement of faith, so they're allowed to do that. And also when hiring staff, right, the Christian school has the right to hire Christian staff that are confessing, evangelical Christians. Where this is not likely to apply is to students in the school, like it's students attending the school. So in that, that's a question that that arises, does Section 41 of the BC Human Rights Code make an exception for religious schools to deny accommodation of sexual minority students based on their religious convictions? So, for example, does it allow a religious school to refuse a transgender student who has requested accommodation and pronoun washroom accommodation or pronoun use accommodation? And in short, the answer is most likely no. So that's something to be aware of. And furthermore, in the eyes of the law, so the staff at the school, the law considers them, when the students are there and under their care, that they're acting as parents. Meaning that they're in place of a parent when they're making decisions about a student and the student being in their care. They're to act as if they're seen as in place of parents, that they would make decisions and act in such a manner as would a parent would caring for the child. And so, to put it in legal terms, there is a duty of care that is required by the law, required of schools for the students. So that duty of care is a legal requirement. And so an organization or a person is to avoid any behavior that can be reasonably expected to cause harm to others. And so this duty of care requirement addresses issues such as discrimination, racism, harassment, abusive actions, right, like bullying, and any other differential treatment. And so under this duty of care, schools in BC have to have policy on such issues, including the policy on treatment of sexual minority students. And I think that this, we can all agree as, that this is a good thing. Obviously, we at Christian schools, the environment is to be one of loving God and loving neighbor. And so, we should rightfully want to avoid and all this kind of treatment. I think we all agree these are good things, right? Getting rid of racism and any abusive action towards anyone. So for any discrimination towards a student that would, in any other circumstance, be impermissible, the school would have to show the accommodation resulted in undue hardship. Okay, so if a school is not going to accommodate a student, let's say a transgender student, this discrimination, would in all other circumstances not be permitted. If the school were going to deny accommodation, they would have to show that that accommodation resulted in an undue hardship to the organization. And so from what I'm led to believe, it is very challenging to use the undue hardship defense in court. So the school would have to prove that all reasonable means of accommodation were exhausted, and to accommodate any further would cause real and severe hardship on the institution, the school. And so the assumption is accommodation. The assumption in the eyes of the law is accommodation has been made, and that any further accommodation would result in undue hardship. The Human Rights Court Tribunal is unlikely going to side with an organization that has made no attempt at accommodation and does not have a policy in place for such accommodation. So the court is not going to look kindly on an organization that's being sued, let's say, for sexual discrimination or something like that, and that the school or organization has made no attempt at accommodation, that there's been nothing done. And it would be very hard to show that using a person's preferred pronouns or making accommodation for washroom use would be to, in the eyes of the law, would have resulted in undue hardship to the school or organization. And if there was no policy on it whatsoever, that doesn't look good in the eyes of the court. They're not going to look favorably upon that. So that's a very quick and broad summary of what the legal opinion is that, this basically that there is a requirement for accommodation. So what is the thing where we're at right now is that, like I said, all of this is very uncharted. There's a lot of unknowns. And where Christian organizations, maybe other independent, other religious institutions stand right now is that there is a requirement of accommodation, but there's no right now there's no measure what that accommodation is. There's no kind of point. There's not a lot of case law that is available to look upon and say, okay, this is how this is playing out in the courts. This is basically the minimum standard. There's none of that. So the schools are in a position right now, if they are going to choose to follow legal opinion and are deciding, okay, they have a kind of clean slate. We are going to make an accommodation here. We will accommodate up to this point for these things. Beyond this, we won't accommodate. So there's that freedom right now for schools to do that, for Christian schools to do that. However, that is not a guarantee that then if there's some legal action against a school for someone who disagrees with that, and then they go before the courts, that the court will say, well, that was fair enough. So it's unknown. So we can set the standard. There's a sense in which the school can set the standard right now, the accommodation, but there's no guarantee that the courts will see that as enough. So it's really unknown. So there's some freedom there to make the accommodation line, but it's not known if that will satisfy the human rights courts if that goes to a trial. I hope that's clear. I hope that gives you some insight. And so the issues at play there are, again, making accommodation, caring for the student, right, the duty of care, and the undue hardship would have to be shown. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I hope that I've been to a lot of, I've listened to a lot of it and read the legal opinion several times that has been received. So I hope I did a fair job at summarizing that, and that was helpful. So I'm 17 minutes in, and I think what I'm going to do here is I am going to do 2 episodes just for ease of listening if you're listening to this. What I want to do now is I want to shift gears, and I want to talk about in the conversations that I've heard in large groups, there's often some misunderstanding or some blending of or confusion regarding some ideas. And so I want to kind of lay out eight important things that we need to keep in mind, I think, when we enter this discussion, because there are 2 things at play when we're talking about this issue. Christian schools are wrestling from this issue. 2 things that are is basically 2 sides of the same coin. On one side, we are there's what is the practice, what does the school teach regarding sexual orientation and gender identity? So what does the school teach is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is what is the practice regarding the accommodation of sexual minority students. So there's what does the school teach, and then what is the practice of accommodation for sexual minority students. 2 sides of the same coin. I think the first question, right, what does the school teach, is relatively easy to answer for most teachers and parents that I come across. Generally, we're on the same page. In my experience, the second question, the other side of that coin, causes much more heat than light. There's a lot more heat being generated on this one. What is the practice? What do we accommodate in terms of those students who are experiencing or transgender students. What is the practice of the school? How does the school accommodate them? That's a more difficult issue. So it's helpful to clarify some of these things in our conversation. So let's see here. So I've got 8 points here, and I'll just walk through them. So the first, a Christian school, parochial or otherwise, and parochial just means like either a parish or denominational school. So a Christian school, parochial or otherwise, is not a church. It does not consist of pastors nor a board of elders. Its students and society members do not constitute a congregation, and therefore it is not a spiritual authority in place of your church, nor can it exercise any spiritual discipline. And I think this is important. I think sometimes as Christians, when we gather together, there's a sense in which we're all Christians and we're gathered together, so the church is gathered together. But in another sense, just because we're a group of Christians gathering together, so like at the Christian school meeting or society meeting, that does not mean that this is a church, right? So there's no pastor, there's no elders there, and that school society is not in place of your church, and it cannot exercise spiritual discipline. That is for your pastor, board of elders, congregation to do. So there's that. The second, a Christian school is a place of education, not insulation. So the expectation is that our kids, or I would assume the expectation, this should be our expectation, is that our kids, in an appropriate manner and at a proper age, will be introduced to ideas and practices in the culture that are contrary to the Christian faith. Right? This is a key element of our kids learning about their faith and how to interact with the world around them, right? We send them to a Christian school so that they can learn from a Christian worldview, and they can learn where that worldview clashes with the society that they live in. But they can learn to interact properly. They can learn to think through issues in light of their Christian faith. We don't want our kids to go to Christian school to be isolated and insulated from the world, but to learn to live wisely, right? This cultivates wisdom, prudence, empathy, and all these things, how to live in the world in which is not their home. Be in the world, not of it, right? That the idea there. So Christian schools are a place of education, not insulation. The third, love is not reducible to compassion or empathy or mercy. Okay, love, often in conversations or discussions on this, it seems to me that there are people I don't think this is, they're not doing this on purpose, but they seem to, in the midst of the conversation, out of a heart, I think it comes out of a heart that is seeking to help, a student who is experiencing gender dysphoria or something, but they seem to want to reduce love to compassion, or maybe a combination of compassion and mercy and empathy. But I would say love is not reducible to compassion. It's not reducible to just these three things. Love is complex, right? Paul made this clear for us in 1 Corinthians 13, where he outlines a whole bunch of things that love is not. So love is complex, and it's not easily reducible to one thing, nor should we view it as that. And then point 4 is that on the other side of that, a refusal to accommodate. So there are, within the discussion taking place, there are people who are against the whole accommodation approach. And they are often seen, there's often the just jump that anyone who is kind of refusing this approach is therefore, they're haters, they're hating. They don't want to help or have compassion on any of these students. So there's this, if I refuse the whole accommodation approach, that equals hatred. And we want to resist doing that, because that doesn't, right, that's not a, it's not a logical, doesn't follow logically that just because someone doesn't like a particular approach or method, that equals hatred. So we want to be careful not to jump to that conclusion. Number 5, the legal opinion that I just shared with you seeks to understand the laws of British Columbia and to say what it requires of us. It is not an it's not an explication of the law of God. So the laws of BC, Canada, or any other earthly government are to be obeyed insofar as they do not contradict the commands of Scripture or teach or promote an ethical norm contrary to the Scripture. Right? So we want to keep that in mind, that there is legal opinion given that is telling us what the laws of BC are most likely to demand of us. But that does not mean that these are not the laws of God. And so where the law of God differs from a law of an earthly government or laws of BC, Canada, we yield to the law in those, the law of God in those cases as Christians. Point number 6, the reality of students struggling with sexual identity and gender dysphoria does not go away with a refusal of accommodation. Okay, so there's sometimes the idea is that if we just refuse accommodation, then this whole thing goes away, right? We just march on. And that's clearly not the case. So we don't solve the issue, the struggles of students by just refusing accommodation. On the other hand, accommodating does not solve the issue either. It does not solve a student's identity or gender dysphoria struggle. So we want to keep in mind, right, that this doesn't go away if we refuse accommodation, and if we give accommodation, this doesn't solve the problem either. It doesn't help solve the struggle of this person. The 7th is one that is, I think one that is, I've seen a lot of, is that it seems that sometimes there's the idea that this decision that we're making has one kind of, we're looking at the student who is identifying as a gender other than their biological sex, the gender at birth, and we're making decisions based on them and their family. Now, but we have to realize they're one side of this, right? Decisions on this issue will not only affect the student who's struggling and their family, but decisions on this issue in the context of the school community is going to affect the entire school community, all of the students there. This is not something that just is going to affect a couple students. This affects the entire community, and I think we need to keep that in mind as we seek to make these decisions, that these are decisions that go well beyond just a student or a family. They're very they're going to impact all of the school community. And then 8, and finally the 8th one, the debate over accommodation to sexual orientation or gender dysphoria is not analogous to other so-called Christian controversies that we've seen over the past number of years. So in the past number of years, there has been, lively, rich debate on things such as marriage, divorce, and remarriage, or the male-female roles, especially concerning leadership in the church and these things. So these have been very, controversial debates within Christianity, and this has been deemed as just another kind of Christian debate. And so the impression is given that it's ultimately, given the passage of time, these things are just going to kind of, we'll see how silly this whole thing is and just kind of move on. and I don't. I think that the this issue, the transgender issue, is not analogous to those other debates, and I'll touch on that briefly. So we're at 30 minutes, so I'll touch that briefly in the second episode of this. I hope that was so. So what I've done, hopefully this episode, is I've given you kind of the what the law is going to require of Christian schools, and that is accommodation. How much accommodation is yet to see. The school has to. Right now, it's in the school's kind of hand to make accommodation and draw the line where they want, and then wait to see how it plays out in the courts. And then I've given 8 things that 8 areas of confusion, I think, or assumptions that are made in the discussion that need to be clarified. And there's probably more than 8. As you listen, you probably have more. I would love to hear from you if you want to just share in the comments or whatever. That would be, I'd love to hear from you. So I'm gonna end the episode here, and then what I'm gonna do next time in the next episode is take up the importance of this issue, what's at stake, why it matters. So I'll post a second episode in just a little bit here. Thanks for listening.